Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 112. I am your host, Barney Smith of storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and award-winning comic creator, Zander Cannon. Zander, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, because you award-winning, yes, because you got an Eisner Award for.
Yep. Top 10 won some Eisner Awards.
Right.
Yeah. Heck won a Stumptown Award.
Right.
You accumulate them along the way. It's
right, and then it's
stick around long enough.
Stick around long enough, and it'll be in 2 years. You'll be celebrating 30 years of being in the field too.
Yeah, like just like a knife to the heart. It hits you, Yeah. Wow. You're right. 30 years because I started in '93.
You started in '93. Yeah.
Yeah. I just for whatever reason, my people in my studio. We were talking about chrome covers, and so I showed them the chrome cover of Chainsaw Vigilante, the first comic that I did. And yeah, it was from 1993. I was a couple months short of my 21st birthday when that came out.
And that was through New England Comics, correct?
New England Comics, yeah. So like it was maybe the third spinoff of the Tick.
Okay.
After Paul the Samurai and the Man-Eating Cow.
Right.
So
that's right. And that was your first. And that was you were talking about back in '93 is when they were given every young artist. They didn't know who was going to be the next.
That was an accepted strategy or risk, to say like, oh, this person, this guy's hot stuff or whatever, and like he's young anyway, so let's give him a shot.
And we'll jump in on just asking for some tips and advice for upcoming artists and stuff and writers and in a little bit. But you went from because you did that and then you came out with back was it 97 or 98? You did Replacement God. That was your first solo series, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That was when I was kind of like, oh, it's hard to sort of like do what people want you to do. So I just kind of, if you wanted to work with a really small press that was doing black and white comics, it's like you could kind of do in a way what you want, within reason, you could do what you wanted. And I felt like that was for a writer artist, that was a sort of good move at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you took a break for a little bit where you moved overseas for a bit. Were you still drawing when you went to Japan?
Yeah. So by the time we left for Japan, I'd started working on Top 10, and we'd done the whole 12 issues of Top 10, and then I was starting on Smacks, and so I lived overseas while I was doing Smacks.
Okay.
And so I think I might have finished when I was over there. 2004 was when we came back. So
okay.
So yeah, I was working on that overseas, and we were sending the pages physically back and forth. Like it's like now it seems like that wouldn't really, it wouldn't really sort of, interrupt things too much. But then it sure did. Like having to use Airborne Express or FedEx or whatever it was overseas.
So I mean, because of your career so far, you've seen a lot of changes happening. What are some of the things that you've seen that have kind of popped up for you that have made your artwork incredibly easier?
Well, I mean, digital, being able to transmit things digitally is incredible because it's just like, oh, let's do it 5. Okay, 4:45. Let's start the upload. Like I've got fast internet. We can do it. But whereas, I mean, I just remember running to make the deadline at the Airborne when DC Comics was using Airborne Express instead of FedEx. Right. I had to run to the basement of this building in the parking garage and and I was always like I had all this I'd been up all night and I was exhausted and anyway yeah. But also like I mean I feel like changing to digital artwork really, I mean, it was a huge change for me, and it was a lot of people are reluctant to do it because they have such a good aftermarket on their originals, and that's never really been a big thing for me. I mean, here and there, but I know I'll draw Spider-Man, and so like that doesn't really make a big difference. Right. So, but changing to digital stuff where you could, you draw something and it's not it's good, but it's an inch to the right, you can move it, and you could start introducing color earlier on, and you can do things and like separate, you can do sort of mechanical separations. What would be mechanical separations in a really easy way? And that just changed everything for me, to be able to do the art start to finish without having to sort of kind of mathematically pre-plan things. And
so that was easy for you, as you mentioned, is like, some folks that have been working for years have kind of stuck in their own way, saying, I'm gonna ink it out, I'm gonna draw it out on paper, and then they're still doing it analog versions, I guess. Yeah. Did you have some of those hesitations when you first started trying to dabble into digital?
Never in terms of the money or whatever, but it's like I think every young artist has sort of like a purist stage where they're like, is it really art if you don't have ink, this brand of ink on this brand of paper? And it's like, yeah, of course it is. I mean, like, and it's so funny that it's always sort of that. I felt like when I was really young, when I was this pure, like it has to be this way. Right. And now it's like, as I've gotten older, I'm like, oh yeah, whatever it takes. I mean, I think that there's things I get, fussy and, want to keep exactly right. But I feel like it's an important thing to really realize what the important things is. What's important about it is not so much the materials as it is the outcome. How does it look in the end? If you can mimic a line digitally that you can do, that you really liked in analog, comic art, then great, you did it. You nailed it.
And what do you use? Do you use Procreate? Do you use the Photoshop, Illustrator, or you mentioned the Cintiq earlier that you use a Cintiq too.
Yeah. So I use Photoshop and InDesign to sort of like keep everything sort of put together, because this isn't for like because I think it's the best. It's because I paid for it. I got it, and I don't feel, and I was in the middle of I've been in the same, been doing the same series for 6 years digitally, and so it's like I don't want to change horses midstream. In a couple months when I finish, it's a different story. So, right. But I also then switched to using Code Studio Pro. I mean, I think I still even use Manga Studio 5, but like. Because it deals better with pressure sensitivity, and just brush strokes are better. And so I did that for inking and lettering. Right. So yeah, I mean, I've made a lot of little tiny corrections and changes over the years, but small ones, because I was trying to stay consistent.
Right. And so you're talking about what you mentioned, your ongoing series, Kaiju Max, which you started in 2015, and you have it set up as seasons. So every year it seems like we call it a new season to that, and right now you just season 5 came out in 2019 is what.
Yeah.
And do you? So tell people about Kaiju Max. That's like your. That's a fun project, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it was kind of on the tail end of like people doing like mashup stuff where it's like, oh, it's Dracula versus a hammerhead shark or whatever. And so I kind of, I don't know if I was chasing trends or anything, but I just sort of, I wanted to do a monster comic book, but I didn't have a hook for it. I wanted to just sort of say, well, what do they do when they're not monstering? They're not rampaging or whatever. And so I said, well, maybe they have a bar, or how about a prison? So I settled on like a prison, and then instead of having it be, instead of having it sort of be like the same guys with the good guys, like the superheroes, the Ultraman superheroes, capture them and put them in prison, it's more like these monsters are just minding their own business and they get stuck in prison. And then they form gangs and they deal drugs and they, and everything is giant size, and they have a weight room, and they're bench pressing, container ships, or they're snorting uranium, or like all, because everything has a dumb little joke that you can do, right? And so then I thought that would be kind of fun, and and it has been fun. Like I think that there's been like all along you can do this plus this equals haha this funny joke, but then you can also play it straight, and have sad or bittersweet or tragic stories happen along the way, and and I've extended the framing to not just be about kaiju, Japanese kaiju, but like also American cryptids, or worldwide cryptids, older stuff like Gigantor, or newer stuff like Pokemon, or and then of course I try to work in stuff about Evangelion and whatever, Gundam, and all kinds of things like that. I think that there's an extended reference on Puff the Magic Dragon. Anyway, yeah, like everything. The nice thing is that everything is kind of within range. That everything's sort of fair game.
Right. And so talk to us about, is this an idea that you were, as you kind of said, you're sitting on this for a while? Was this kind of like a wish project for yours that you were able to finally do?
It was, because it's so high concept, and because it's so sort of like precise in its concept, it was actually something that I intended to do as sort of a side project, because I thought, oh, well, the roadmap's written, like I could just script this and not have to, and then I could work on other things. And so, but when you're doing stuff that's small press, there's just never enough money. And so like, Ryan Brown and I were going to work on this together. He does God Hates Astronauts, and Curse Words, and a bunch of other stuff. But it was just like there wasn't going to be enough money total. So he moved on, and he had a Kickstarter and all this sort of stuff. So he moved on to bigger and better things. And so they asked me if I wanted to draw it, and initially I was like, oh no, thanks. Ugh. It's so much work. I mean, really, it just, because it's like because once you start to write it and draw it and stuff like that, you end up feeling like, I'm going to be doing all this work, but then we also have to pay like a letterer and a colorist, and there's just not going to be any money, at all. So I thought, well, if I letter it and color it, then maybe we can make this work, and that's what I ended up doing. And I mean, it's an absurd amount of work, but I also think, well, because I'm doing everything. And I worked with Jason Fisher, who's the color assistant on it. You can kind of trim things and make it a little bit easier, and save a little bit of time. And so anyway, I mean, it's just we barely made it work by the skin of our teeth for 6 years.
So is this a full-fledged storyline? Is there a season 6, or is this? There's
a season 6, and that's the last season, and that's going to complete it. And it's going to complete the whole story, and that's as long as it's ever been. It's as long as it's planned to be, as from the very beginning. Because we were like, well, 6 seasons mean that we can collect it into 3 hardcovers, and so I mean, there were those considerations, and it's nice to have those early on, because you can always, kind of fudge the edges of your creative idea to make for a marketing thing if you need to, especially if you know right away. But yeah, it's I'm really happy with how it's worked out, and just storyline ideas kind of fell in my lap, and I think I think it's going to work out really, really nicely.
Right here, it's like season 6.
Yeah. I'm working on the second to last issue right now. So.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's crazy. I mean, I've never worked on anything this long. Anything, not just comics, but anything at all.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. Is like, did you? Because you wrote this and everything. Did you, as you say, you already kind of had it planned out that it was going to be 6. Was there anything ideas as a writer for it as well? Was there any surprises that the characters were doing that you were like, I guess this is where we're going? Like,
yeah, every time. Well, one of the things that would happen is that I would like the design of a character, like just a background character who's like, oh, I'm going to kind of base him on this Ultraman monster. But then I would like my design. It's like keep bringing the character back, because I just like drawing them. The other thing that would happen is that, I would kind of have somebody go out on a sour note and go, no, but what's that character experiencing? And so there was a lot of sort of like a little bit of empathy where I'd be like, oh, I like that character, or I'm interested in what they're doing. And so I would bring them back and sort of, maybe something that was going to be a new character, I would just have it be an existing character. I mean, and then there was always things that were like, I might have had a storyline of a character one character mapped out, but I needed to sort of like create another storyline that was going to wrap its way into it. And so some things that I'm doing have been planned since the very beginning, and then some things I figure out on the day, because it's like, I need something that sort of goes along with this theme. So yeah, it can be stuff, yeah, long in the works or on, that moment.
Right. So because as you say, you've never worked on something this long, was there anything that you learned from this experience of putting this together, of like the storytelling aspects or the or just the production aspects of this?
Well, certainly I learned of it. I mean, I knew how to color, right, but I learned how to color. Like, I feel like I could color really well if you gave me a lot of time before, but if you didn't give me very much time, I would kind of give you a pretty basic color job. But I got to the point where it's like, oh yeah, I can sort of I can color at sort of what I consider to be sort of an A minus level, say, consistently, rather than A plus one time and then mostly C plus. Right. So I mean, I think that really happened. I mean, my lettering got a lot more consistent and a lot neater and less idiosyncratic, but better, overall. My inking became a little bit more, just more polished. It became, I felt like I got a better sense of the depth and so forth. I mean, everything got a little bit better. And then my writing, I think, because early on in any story, but especially in a kind of X plus Y type of story like that, you start off with a lot of ideas, and you can and it's really like narrowing down what you're going to do. But then over the course of time, when you kind of have started to use all those sort of obvious ideas, I realized, oh yeah, I had to get a little bit better in sort of mining details out of, in ways that I hadn't done before, like finding what was left in this sort of goofy, right, sketch comedy idea that I've created.
So how much of it was you're kind of like sticking to, like, as you said, kind of like your outline and storyline, and how much of it was feedback from your readers who would say, hey, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that?
I mean, I took a little bit of, there's a little bit of each, but I mean, a lot of it was, I mean, it's really kind of amazing, because if you watch a silly old like 70s monster movie and you are thinking about like what would be the silliest thing to make a sort of gruesome or sad like crime story out of, like I would watch like 2 movies and I'd have like 50 ideas, and I mean that I might never get to, and probably won't get to at this point. But like, a lot of it, I mean, people would say like, oh, don't forget about this movie. And I would watch that movie and go, oh yeah, you're right. That is a good idea. But I mean, obviously people are kind of a little bit leery of taking ideas directly, ideas from people. Right. Just because you don't want to sort of feel like you're stealing ideas.
Right.
And yeah. But mainly it's just like, I just want to watch monster movies with that sort of filter in my head, and I go, oh yeah, like that funny thing, that would be really gruesome if you did it this way.
And so have you? So getting Kaiju Max down and kind of seeing that, as you said, you work on the second to last. As you said, second to last.
Yeah, second to last.
Have you, as you said, have you taken some of these ideas and some of the writing styles and techniques to kind of go back and work on some of your other titles at all?
Well, like Replacement God or things like that, or what do you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, the Replacement God has been a huge empty box on my to-do list for, what's it been? 25 years almost. And so, yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that, and I've been, and thinking about like, okay, well, what would that look like if you colored it, and what would that look like if, I tried to sort of replicate that art style, say working digitally rather than on paper. And yeah, I mean, it would be really interesting. I mean, part of me though really likes to think about like, I want to do something that is conceived in the 2020s, not the 90s. I mean, I feel like, I go back to certain things and it's like, oh well, yeah, that's a very 90s idea, in that like it's kind of a response to the 70s and 80s, as opposed to, I think now it's like I wrote a whole essay on it in the back of Kaiju Max, but it's like we've been shown a whole new sort of template for evil in the last decade that it's like, oh, that's really interesting. I mean, the same way that like the same way that comics in the 60s, 50s and 60s had sort of the wars of that era, those eras to sort of draw from. It's like we have a whole new sort of set of, sort of a whole new ethical map to sort of draw from. And I think that kind of stuff is really fun. I don't want to do throwbacks so much anymore, if possible.
Right, because it's like the not only just like the professional evolution that you've experienced, but also just kind of like the philosophical evolution. Is like the things that were important to you and the stories you wanted to tell 25 years ago aren't quite the same stories that you want to kind of tell now. Is that?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times you're kind of hemmed into the ideas that you're going to do, because it's like a DC editor says like, well, we need a story for Blue Beetle or whatever, and you aren't necessarily thinking like, how will I bring Blue Beetle into the modern day? You just are like, well, let's come up with a villain, and they've got a dozen of them, and let's come up with a scenario, and you just kind of write a by the numbers. I mean, if for work for hire, the smartest thing to do is come up with a by the numbers story and just knock it, do the best you can with it. As opposed to sort of saying like, what do I want to say about the world as it exists today?
Yeah. And so, what would you be your, because of that, you got started in the 90s. You're hitting off, and it's a completely different world right now as compared to if someone's getting out of art school right now in the this time. So let me ask you the question: is that would you recommend someone who wants to go into creating comics? Would you recommend that they go to art school as well? Did you think the value is still there?
The value is absolutely there if you can afford it. But I also think if you're going to be taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans, I just think I don't know that comics is going to be your best route to getting that back. You know what I mean? Like, and I think, and that's really unfortunate. But I also just think, well, nobody at any comic book publisher is checking your transcripts. Like they don't care if you took, community ed classes. I mean, they don't care if you went to it. And I think, there's a lot to be learned by taking class after class after class. But I also think you could take 2 classes and then just draw for 10,000 hours, and you're going to probably be in around the same spot. I mean, that might be my bias coming through from the 90s, where there were no comic book. Art school was going to teach you how to sculpt and paint and stuff. They weren't going to teach you how to draw with pen and ink, except insofar as, life drawing and pen and ink. But I don't know. I sort of felt like no matter what art classes I took, I was really just reading comics and reverse engineering them. You know, and I think in a way, I think that's the best way to go about it, because you're going to be more observant into what you really want it to do, rather than sort of saying like, I must start with art with life drawing and work my way into making comics.
Right.
You know, I feel like start with the word balloons,
yeah,
and work your way backwards.
And did you see? And how would it? And how would it be too? Is like, would you, with that, in that specific direction, is one of the pieces that we hear a lot is you need maybe some finance classes as well, learning the business of being an artist. Would you weigh in on any importance on that as well?
I mean, I think that we should know that, but I wouldn't know what a finance class would teach you, other than, I would think that a video on how to do a successful Kickstarter would be just as useful. I mean,
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I wish I had more savvy in that department,
Yeah.
But to me, it was always just sort of like keep a low overhead, work hard, find places that will appreciate what you do, and yeah.
And what would be like your advice to like when it comes to when it comes to either finding a publisher or self-publishing? Because you kind of had some success in both in a way.
Well, yeah, and I think the main thing is finding out what you do naturally, like, and where the center of your style is, because I think that when I had kind of a semi sort of adventure story style, but it was kind of drifted into cartooniness, and I think that because I could kind of do an adventure style, I kept trying to get work at DC, but every time I was getting a job, it was kind of as an exception, like, oh, well, maybe it'll work for a little while, maybe, but it just was, they just didn't want what I had. And I think that I could have saved myself a lot of grief by being a little bit more honest with myself, where it's like, this is what I do, and this is where I ought to sort of pursue stuff. And in the 90s, it was a different market. I mean, being too cartoony was kind of the kiss of death in terms of like work for hire and stuff like that. I mean, maybe you could do just all those cartoony stuff that mainstream books kind of lasted for a year or so, and
Right.
Now you could do Adventure Time licensed comics until the end of time, or every 50 other licensed cartoony style comic books. But I think that people really knowing what they offer, and I felt like I when I realized that I wasn't just like a good penciler, like I wasn't really going to be a good penciler that I can knock stuff out every month, year after year. I just wasn't going to like it. I wasn't going to enjoy it. But if you let me write and draw, I could create something that maybe only I could create. And I think that knowing where you stand in that kind of continuum, I think is a really helpful thing for people to know. And then you can kind of know where to seek out publishers or patrons or whatever.
Right. But you bring up a good point, as you saw, and you said earlier about there's that magic 10,000 hour thing. Once you do something for 10,000 hours, you're basically you're going to be good at it. I mean, and it's
or you'll know whether you hate doing it.
Yeah. you write and you draw. So I wanted to ask you: do you prefer drawing your own stories, or has there been a story that's like, hey, can you draw this for me, that you just kind of like that you're happy you grabbed a hold of?
I mean, if I'm going to just do one thing, I'd rather draw than write. I mean, I think that it makes more sense to write because it takes less time, supposedly. I mean, it doesn't for me, but Supposedly it does. But I really enjoy the process of drawing a lot more. In fact, one of the things that I did that absolutely baffled a lot of my friends was that for years I was working on other I was working on creator-owned stuff that wasn't really making me any money. So I did layouts for DC, and so like if they would have an artist that was a little bit slow or maybe was new or or something like that, or they wanted to keep a consistent sort of storytelling style across a series, and so I did layouts for other artists, and people were like, why would you want to do that? It's kind of below the line. It's not really, you're not really getting a lot of credit, and it's like, oh, it's so much fun and it's such good practice. And frankly, I would run into no resistance. I'd turn in these layouts and be like, great, good, we'll see you next week. And instead of saying like, oh, geez, your hands look like little bananas instead of real hands, and oh, this guy's eyes are googly or whatever. I never got any of that. It was just sort of like, yeah, this is great sort of conventional storytelling that somebody will be able to follow perfectly. And great. Okay, good. Now I'm going to go. It's the weekend, so I'm never going to think about it until Monday morning.
Right.
And I don't know what conclusion to draw from that, but that was the thing that I really like to do. I like that sort of like the sort of pure comics, between the writing and the
right. So say something, would anybody ever say, hey, listen, can I take, I get, well, okay, what's my question, mate? Is how territorial are you of the world you've created? For instance, if somebody came to you and say, hey, could I do a sequel to Replacement God, or I like the world you created in Heck, can I do something like that, or can you write a script for me and I'll draw, or how are you with that ideas?
Well, that's a funny thing. I've never had to think about it because no one has. But I think I'd like to be sort of cool and calm and, oh yeah, absolutely, no problem. But I probably would be a little bit territorial about it. Just because it's especially something like those the three examples that you gave, Kaiju Max, the Replacement God, and Heck are all very personal to me, and they have characters that I really sort of associate with myself or with people that I know, and so I probably would be a little bit. I probably would sort of feel like, this is my thing. I don't really want to adapt it. But if somebody wanted to, write me an enormous check to make a TV show out of it, that's a whole different story.
And so I'm curious too. Is like it's because you're right where it's like your style of writing fits your style of art as well, and. So how does your process go? Because when I was, reading, I both have here, just in the background, I got Heck and I got Replacement God here. Reading those things, I was just like, there's some ideas that popped in. I'm like, that's just ingenious. Like I've never seen something like that before. Like the idea inside Heck, which I loved a lot, was the ideas that you had to, send messages. I'm not giving away anything. The book's been out for almost 10 years. So
right. And it all happens in like the second chapter anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the idea where you send messages as it's going through the layers of hell, and the only way the person can hear them is when they're experiencing that sin, basically. Yeah. And that time, like where did that idea, that was pretty cool.
The funny thing was, I don't know, because I was drawing that, I was writing and drawing that book, and you can tell in the early chapters it's really rough. I was doing it like an hour a page, and so
the 144 graphic novel channel.
And so up to maybe page 50 or 60, that it's like those are like hour a page, and they look it. But like I think that I was just sort of like, I was writing that sort of standard like PI talking to the client in his office, and he's just kind of laying it out like, here's the deal. And I wanted, and so I was kind of thinking about those voices, the voice of the character just sort of casually laying out all this black magic or whatever that he's going to use, and just the idea of it. I don't know. It just just came to me. I don't know. There was something to be said for sort of like, I'm just writing dialogue between these people, and how whatever comes out is what comes out.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing about all of these books, writing and drawing, is that you don't really have to justify you don't even have to justify it to the artist to sort of say, like, here's an idea I had. I don't know how this works. It's like you just go, oh, there's an idea. Oh, I just drew it. Oh, the drawing made me think of this idea to write, so I'm writing this. And then, oh, the drawing made me think of, And so I like that tight feedback loop where you can just kind of say, like, whatever hits the paper is what happens. And in the case of Heck, it's a totally different story than what I was really intending it to be. I was intending it to be much more lighthearted. I was intending it to be a lot sort of more
pulpy kind of.
Yeah. Well, and a little bit more wide ranging about like afterlives, maybe like not just the Catholic sort of Dante's Inferno, but because of the way that I was, sort of drawn, like when I got to the end of what I sort of considered the first act, I was like, oh, that's what this book is now. Like, I'm not going to introduce any more characters. It's going to be a pretty sort of bleak and stark, story. And I had thought initially that it was going to be a lot more detailed, a lot more, more stuff happening. And so I liked the idea that like I was collaborating with myself in a way, that I was seeing what hit the paper, oh, I can't really draw as much detail, so I guess I'm going to keep those black backgrounds pretty black,
Yeah, and it was good. I mean, the character development on that was just fascinating. Of just in the surprise ending. I'm not gonna say this right, but people got to read the book because there's quite the surprise ending on there. It was like, wow, that was pretty good, and it is. It was you're experiencing the story, and you're kind of discovering it with the protagonist, which made it even more interesting.
Yeah, and I think it meanders quite a bit. I mean, it's a 300-page book almost, and and I think part of me is like, oh, I could tighten that up a little bit, but I also think I kind of like that, it gets to the place that I feel like it gets to the place that you want it to get to. Excuse me. Yeah. But you're not sort of like, because the drawings are so simple that like you don't sort of feel like, oh my gosh, this guy sort of wasted all this time drawing all these all these panels to stretch out the story. Right. I think that when you have like minimal backgrounds, you can kind of extend it, play with the pacing a little bit without sort of feeling like, oh my gosh, I got to draw this this forest 50 times.
Right. So doing this this career, following it for 30 years, so where do you see comics going in the next 20 or 30 years right now?
Well, I mean, the people have been talking about the end of like comic book stores for how long has it been? 40 plus years. I mean, so I kind of can't possibly imagine that there will ever be sort of a meaningful shift away from that. Although, there are lots of small towns that used to have 5 bookstores that have 0, and there are lots of, comic book stores in sort of expensive cities that are really struggling unless they sell, board games and video games and movies or whatever. I mean, even selling movies is sort of, it's not exactly a moneymaker these days. And so I think, I mean, the art form of comics is going great places. Like, I think that just the changes in the last 15 years in terms of like who's making comics, who comics are about, where it's being sold, how people think of it as it's not as niche anymore, like you do something in Iron Man comics and, that's, people are paying attention to that, because they love Iron Man from the movies and from whatever. And so I think I mean, I think that comics are really, really exciting. And I think that now that we've sort of said, oh, the future isn't one thing, the future isn't digital comics, the future isn't print comics, the future is digital and print comics, and, a couple other kinds of comics that we haven't even thought about yet. Right. And I think that that's exciting. And I think that that's fun. And that it's a way of experiencing a story that's very sort of personal and singular. It's not like a TV show that you can watch with a bunch of people, and it's not like it's not like a book that you can read out loud. It's something that you experience very, very personally, and whether you experience that on an iPad or whether you experience it on paper, doesn't matter. It's just a sort of a style of absorbing work, and I'm excited. I'm excited that that's found its place. That it's broken away from genres. It doesn't mean superheroes. It doesn't mean, action adventure. It doesn't mean boys adventure anymore. I mean, it means 1,000 things.
And do you feel that you kind of were a part of that transition with your books? Because you wrote books that weren't about superheroes, like you had some of your more well-known ones. Do you think you kind of had a hand in that, in taking the cultural expectations of what comic books are?
I mean, I'd be delighted if that were true. I would love it. I never think of anything that I do as sort of breaking that sort of membrane into the mainstream. So yeah, I mean, if that's true, I'd be overjoyed. I think that there's always, people will come up to me at conventions and be like, "Oh my gosh, I love this comic. I read it when I was in middle school, and it crumbled to dust." And then I resurrect myself and say, "That's great." but like, I think that there's always somebody. There's always going to be people who really love it, and they may not tell you that year or in the next 10 years. But it's really nice to see that that people will come up to me, have come up to me every year that they just read Heck in college or whatever, and it's always they always have a look in their eye like, and it really messed me up, or I read it at a time when I was really sad and it really sort of like embodied that era, and I was like, okay, that means a lot to me, because it's like that's how I felt when I was writing it too. So, yeah, I mean. Yeah, Lord knows I wish I certainly hope that I had something to do with it.
And do you see words, and also the fact now comics are so accessible. Anybody can make their own comic, either like a web comic or anything like that. What would be your advice for some of those folks to kind of like break out of the noise of literally thousands of comics that are coming out every day?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it all kind of depends on what you're already doing, because I think that some people have a really their own unique style. They have a different kind of voice. That really puts them outside of the pack. But then maybe they need to sort of think if they're already really divergent from the norm. They need to think about like, well, what can I do to sort of like make that palatable to more people? And I don't mean like dumb it down. I don't mean like make it more conventional. But I also think sometimes something that's a crazy style and a cool new voice needs, because I feel like when you have something new and something old, something new, the look of it, something old, the packaging.
Right.
I think that people are really excited about that, like a very conventional mystery story, but that's drawn all weird, or a really, or something that's drawn in a very conventional way, but has a really like intricately structured story. You know what I mean? I feel like sometimes you need to sort of hem things in, like I think about Acme Novelty Library, He told these stories, completely normal stories about people doing normal stuff, but packaged in it, like structured in such a way that it was like all weird. Whereas if you're going to tell a story about like a robot uprising on Jupiter's moons, you're going to want to tell it in a pretty conventional style. Right. Kaiju Max is the same way, where it's like everything that happens in Kaiju Max is completely weird. So I made sure to tell the story in like the most conventional storytelling you possibly have. It's 5 panels on a page, these sort of aggressively neutral compositions. Yeah, that's really what you're seeing. A monster leaning on a mountain, drinking a truck full of coffee or whatever it is. But I think that sometimes it's like, yeah, you have something weird, structure it in a normal way. You have something normal, structure it in a weird way.
I'm just imagining like a truck full of coffee,
when you got to get coffee across town, what else are you going to use?
Yeah, exactly. It's not they brew it themselves. It's a truck full of coffee that shows up a tanker full of coffee.
Yeah, you get it.
So what's next for you, Zander?
I don't really know. I have a couple other projects that I could start on. There's a lot of projects that I've thought of to the point that I could start them the day after I finish Kaiju Max. But I'll be perfectly honest, I would love to just draw something that somebody else wrote for 6 months. As I don't know, is there like a Rick and Morty comic that I could draw, or is there whatever? I'm so I would love to just sort of do something easy for a little while. Not that that's easy, but it's something that I don't have to think of every aspect of it.
Right.
But I don't know. I was brainstorming about a video game. I've got some sort of card game projects that I've been thinking about. That all these stuff that are outside comics that are just kind of fun little side projects that I haven't been able to really fit in. I think it'd be fun to have to really sit down and work on those for a while. But to be perfectly honest, I have no idea.
So Zander, where can people, if they want to, would Big Time Attic, is that your central location?
Big Time Attic was like a studio that we did a while ago. The easiest place to find me is on Twitter.
Okay.
There's kaijumax.com is a very infrequently updated website, and and then if people want to find me on social media, Twitter and Instagram are probably the best place.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Great. Well, thank you very much, Zander.
Thanks so much for chatting with me. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Really fun. And when you told me about reading Heck, I really, again, it's like I said, people are always coming up and telling me these specific circumstances under which they read Heck, and it's it really just fills my bucket every time. When people said oh, was it this particular moment in my life? Right. Great. I hope it didn't bum you out too much.
I read graphic novels all the time, but there was nothing that actually there. I don't know. I think there was something about the, how personal the story was, and how it just kind of. It's one of those books where you just kind of always remember. So yeah, it was a well-deserved award that you got on that. So, yeah.
Thanks. Well, that means a lot.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. And next time, when you have your next project, come back on.
Absolutely, I'd love to. I'd really love it.
Thank you.
Well, I went to college in Iowa, at Grinnell College, and then and then it was people who left, who didn't have a particular place to go. There's a lot of people who went to Minneapolis, Chicago, Iowa City, and sort of Goldilocks thing, where Chicago's so big and sort of intimidating, and Iowa City's still kind of a college town, and Minneapolis seemed you don't have to pay a fortune to have a tiny place. But you're also sort of in a city,
and you get to experience you get the benefits of a big city, but you also get to experience the really cold winters at the same time too.
yeah. All the pluses, right?
All the pluses.
Yeah, you get
big
to have
city, cold winters.
Cold winters. Oh yeah, you get just so good every time it starts.